Ambassador Kethel of the Vornian Collective arrived at the Grand Assembly Hall exactly 15 minutes early, as he had done for the past 200 years. His four legs carried him smoothly across the polished floor that reflected the light of 1,000 distant stars through the massive dome above. The hall could seat representatives from over 300 species, and today it was nearly full. Trade disputes, territorial negotiations, and the usual complaints about shipping lanes filled the agenda. But something felt wrong. Kethel's compound eyes swept across the curved rows of seats until they found the section reserved for Earth and its colonies. The seats were empty, all 12 of them. No human ambassadors sat in the central chair. No aides shuffled documents. No junior diplomats whispered among themselves. He checked his internal chronometer. The session would begin in 10 minutes. Humans were never late. In his 2 centuries of service, Kethel had never once seen the human delegation arrive after the opening ceremonies began. They considered it disrespectful. Perhaps they were delayed, he thought. A transport issue, a communication problem. The Grand Speaker, an ancient being of living crystal named Salumix, called the assembly to order. Her voice rang through the hall like wind chimes in a storm. Let the 4067th session of the Galactic Council commence. Will the Earth delegation please confirm their attendance? Silence. Salumix waited. The hall waited. 300 species held their breath without knowing why. Earth delegation, please respond. Nothing. A murmur began to spread through the assembly. Kethel felt his secondary heart begin to beat faster. He had worked with the humans for decades. Ambassador Chen was his closest friend among the other species. They shared meals together, discussed philosophy, argued about art. Chen would never simply fail to appear. Communications. Establish contact with the Earth Embassy, Salumix commanded. The response came quickly. Grand Speaker, the Earth Embassy is not responding. All communication channels are inactive. The murmur grew louder. Contact the human homeworld directly. A longer pause this time. The communications officer, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, flickered with distress. Grand Speaker, we cannot establish contact with Earth. All transmission channels to human space have been terminated. The network nodes they maintained are offline. Now the murmur became a roar. Representatives shouted questions. Some demanded explanations. Others called for calm. Kethel sat very still, processing what he had just heard. The humans maintained over 30% of the Council's long-range communication infrastructure. They had built most of it themselves decades ago, when the other species couldn't agree on technical standards. If those systems were offline, it wasn't an accident. Admiral Drexivoth of the Hegemony rose from his seat. He was tall, scaled, with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. His species had opposed human membership in the Council from the beginning. Perhaps, he said, his voice carrying easily across the chaos, the humans have finally revealed their true nature. Perhaps they have abandoned us. Impossible, Kethel found himself saying. The humans are our partners. They would not simply leave, would they not? Drexivoth smiled, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth. They have always been strange, emotional, unpredictable. Perhaps they grew tired of pretending to be civilized. Before Kethel could respond, a young aide rushed to Salumix's platform and whispered urgently. The Grand Speaker's crystalline form dimmed slightly, a sign of deep concern. I have received reports, she announced, and the hall fell silent. The human ambassadors departed their embassy last night. All staff have been evacuated. The building stands empty. More reports followed throughout the day. Human merchants had recalled their ships from every port in the galaxy. Human engineers working on joint projects had quietly finished their work and departed without explanation. Human doctors serving in interspecies medical facilities had transferred their patients to local staff and vanished. Human teachers, scientists, artists, workers all gone. Every single human, everywhere in the galaxy, had returned to their own space within a single night. Kethel left the assembly hall as emergency sessions were called and accusations flew. He walked through the station's corridors until he reached the human embassy. The doors stood open. Inside, everything was clean and organized. Desks cleared, Files properly archived. Not a single personal item remained. It was as if the humans had never been there at all. On Ambassador Chen's desk, Kethel found a small object. A gift he had given his friend years ago, a crystal from his homeworld. Meant to symbolize eternal friendship. Chen had left it behind. Or perhaps, Kethel thought with growing dread, she had returned it. In the days that followed, the Council sent ships to human space. They found borders sealed by automated warning buoys. The messages were polite but firm. Human space is closed to external traffic. Please turn back. This is not a negotiation. Ships that ignored the warnings found their navigation systems gently, but irresistibly overridden, turning them back the way they came. No weapons were fired. No threats were made. But the message was clear. Humanity wanted no contact with the rest of the galaxy. The Council demanded explanations. They received none. They threatened consequences. The silence continued. They offered negotiations, apologies for unknown offenses, promises of reform. Nothing. Kethel spent weeks reviewing records, searching for the cause. What had they done? What had driven their partners away? He found no single incident, no obvious trigger. But as he dug deeper, a pattern emerged that made his twin hearts ache with shame. 50 years of small dismissals. 50 years of their advice being ignored. 50 years of their warnings about aggressive species being dismissed as human paranoia. 50 years of their contributions being minimized while their sacrifices were expected. The humans had asked for help with a colony disease 3 years ago. The request had been buried in bureaucracy and never addressed. They had proposed reforms to make the Council more equitable. The proposal had been laughed at by the elder races. 1,000 small cuts, 1,000 tiny insults. And through it all, the humans had smiled, worked harder, and never complained. Until now. They didn't leave suddenly. Kethel said to the emergency committee that had formed to address the crisis. They left finally. Admiral Drexivoth dismissed his words with a wave of a scaled hand. Whatever their reasons, their absence presents opportunities. The territories they protected are now vulnerable. The trade routes they managed are now open. You cannot be serious, Kethel said. We should be trying to bring them back, not exploiting their departure. The humans made their choice. We must make ours. The Admiral's mirror eyes reflected Kethel's horrified face back at him. The strong survive. The weak become history. Perhaps the humans understood that better than we thought. The committee dissolved into argument. Meanwhile, in a remote sector of space that the humans had quietly patrolled for decades, a small world called Valoria Prime received disturbing news. Their protectors were gone. Their borders were undefended. And Drexy warships had been spotted moving in their direction. The Valorians sent a desperate message to Earth. They begged for help. They offered anything, resources, loyalty, whatever humanity wanted. The silence continued. On Earth, in a small house overlooking an ocean that had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, Admiral Sarah Chen sat in her garden and watched the sunset. She had served the Council for 30 years. She had believed in cooperation, in building bridges between species. She had given everything to that dream. Now she was home. Her garden was blooming. Her family surrounded her. For the first time in decades, she felt at peace. But sometimes late at night, she would look up at the stars and wonder about the friends she had left behind. She would think about Kethel and his crystal, still sitting on her old desk. She had wanted to bring it with her. In the end, she had decided that a clean break was kinder. Her daughter found her one night, standing alone on the balcony. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah smiled sadly. "I'm fine. Just thinking about the Council, about whether we did the right thing." Her daughter put an arm around her. "They didn't appreciate you. They didn't appreciate any of us. You gave them everything, and they treated you like servants, I know. But there were good ones among them. And now they're going to suffer because we left. That's not your responsibility anymore." Sarah nodded, but she didn't believe it. She had spent her whole life believing that the strong had a duty to protect the weak. That was what being human meant. Walking away went against everything she believed, but staying had become impossible. Her people were tired, tired of being taken for granted, tired of being dismissed, tired of giving everything and receiving nothing in return. So they had left. closed their doors, said goodbye to a galaxy that had never really wanted them in the first place. Now all they could do was wait and see what happened next. And across the vast darkness of space, in the halls of the Drexy hegemony, Admiral Drexivoth was already making plans. The humans were gone. Their territories were unprotected. Their allies were vulnerable. The time had come, he thought, to show the galaxy what true strength looked like. He smiled his needle-toothed smile and gave the order for his F. 3 months after humanity's withdrawal, the Galactic Council was falling apart. Kethral stood before the emergency assembly, trying to present his report, but half the seats were empty. Species that had attended every session for centuries now sent apologies, or no message at all. The Great Dome, that once shone with the light of unity, now felt cold and hollow. The trade disruptions are growing worse, he reported to those who remained. 17 systems have reported critical shortages of medical supplies. The humans manufactured most of our neural repair technology. Without them, patients are dying. They are dying because of human selfishness. Admiral Drexivoth interrupted from his seat. His presence at council meetings had become more frequent since the humans left. More confident. We should have never become dependent on them. We became dependent because they were reliable. Kethral said sharply. Because they did what they promised. Because when they said they would help, they helped. The Admiral waved a scaled hand dismissively. The past is the past. We must focus on the future. That future, Kethral knew, was exactly what the Admiral wanted to discuss. The Drexy hegemony had been expanding steadily since humanity's departure. 3 small worlds had already been absorbed into their territory. The Council had issued statements of concern. Nothing more. After the session ended, Kethral retreated to the archives. He had been spending more time there lately, searching for understanding. The archivists, beings of pure thought preserved in crystalline matrices, had helped him access records going back 50 years. The pattern he found broke his heart. 50 years ago, a human delegation had proposed building a network of emergency response stations throughout Council space, ships filled with supplies, medical equipment, rescue teams, ready to respond to any disaster within hours. The proposal had been rejected. Too expensive, the elder races said. Too ambitious. Let each species take care of their own. The humans had built the network anyway, using their own resources. They never asked for recognition. They never demanded payment. They simply did the work because it needed to be done. 40 years ago, the humans had warned about the growing aggression of the Drexy hegemony. They had presented evidence of secret military buildups, expansion plans, conquered species being erased from history. The Council had dismissed the warnings as human paranoia. The Drexy were difficult, the elders said, but not dangerous. The humans had stationed their own ships near vulnerable borders anyway, quietly, without announcement, simply there, maintaining peace through presence. 30 years ago, the humans had proposed reforms to the Council's voting structure. The current system gave the oldest races the most power, regardless of contribution or merit. The humans suggested a more equal arrangement. They had been laughed at, literally laughed at in the Grand Assembly. The record showed it clearly, waves of mocking laughter from species that considered themselves superior. The human ambassador had sat quietly through it all, then thanked the Council for their time, and left without another word. 20 years ago, a plague had swept through the outer colonies. Species were dying by the billions. The Council debated response strategies for 3 weeks. The humans had arrived with hospital ships within 3 days. They had saved over 4 billion lives while the Council was still arguing about jurisdiction. No one had thanked them. The official records barely mentioned their involvement. 10 years ago, the humans had requested assistance with a disease affecting their colony on Kepler-4 a simple request for medical resources. The request had been assigned to a subcommittee, which had assigned it to another subcommittee, which had eventually lost the file entirely. 40,000 humans had died. The Council had sent condolences. Nothing more. Kethral closed the records and sat in the darkness of the archive. He understood now. The humans hadn't left because of one incident. They had left because of everything. Because year after year, decade after decade, they had given everything and received nothing. Not even basic respect. And the galaxy had been too blind to see what it was losing until it was gone. A message arrived on his personal communicator. It was from Valoria Prime, the peaceful world that had depended on human protection. The message was brief and desperate. The Drexy fleet has arrived. They demand our surrender. We have no military. We have no defenses. We have sent messages to every council member. No one is coming. Please, someone, anyone, help us. Kethril tried to contact the council's emergency response office. He was put on hold for 40 minutes. When someone finally answered, they informed him that the Valorian situation was under review. He tried to contact Earth directly. His message bounced back automatically. Human spaces closed to external communications. In the end, all he could do was watch. The Drexy conquered Valoria Prime in 11 days. They were efficient and brutal. Resistance was crushed without mercy. Cultural sites were destroyed. Libraries burned. History erased. By the time the council finished their review, 5 million Valorians were dead and the rest were being processed into labor camps. The council issued a strongly worded condemnation. The Drexy ignored it. Other aggressive species watched. They saw weakness. They saw opportunity. Within weeks, 3 more invasions began across the galaxy. Species that had lived in peace for generations suddenly found themselves under attack. Some fought back. Most didn't have the means. The council called emergency session after emergency session. Votes were taken. Resolutions passed. But no one was willing to commit military forces. No one was willing to sacrifice their own safety for others. That had always been humanity's role. And now humanity was gone. On the human colony world of New Beijing, a man named Wei Lin watched the news from beyond the borders. He was a teacher, specializing in galactic history. For 20 years, he had taught human children about the great project of interstellar cooperation. He had believed in that project with all his heart. Now he watched civilizations burn, and he felt sick. "We can't just sit here," he said to his wife one night. "We can't just watch people die. The government made its decision," she replied gently. "The people voted. We're done with the council. I know. I voted for withdrawal too." But he gestured helplessly at the screen, where footage showed Valorian refugees dying in the cold of space. Their ships too damaged to reach safety. How can we live with ourselves? We gave them everything for 50 years. They gave us nothing. At some point, we had to stop. But is this who we are? People who turn away. People who let others suffer because our feelings were hurt. His wife didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Neither did Wei Lin. Neither did anyone. The withdrawal had been overwhelmingly popular when it was announced. Humanity was tired. Humanity was hurt. Humanity wanted to be left alone. But now, watching the consequences unfold, doubts were spreading. Opinion polls showed growing uncertainty. Protest movements were forming. Some demanded the borders be reopened. Others insisted they should stay closed forever. The government remained silent. Then the first refugee ships arrived. They came from Valoria, somehow escaping the Drexy blockade. Damaged, overcrowded, barely functional. They broadcast desperate pleas as they approached human space. "Please, we have children aboard. We have wounded. We have nowhere else to go. We know you have left the council. We are not asking you to return. We are just asking for shelter, for mercy, for a chance to survive." The automated border systems were programmed to turn all ships away. For 3 hours, the refugee ships drifted at the edge of human space, waiting for a response that wouldn't come. Then something changed. The automated systems suddenly opened a corridor. The refugee ships were guided through, gently, carefully, to a station where medical teams were already waiting. No announcement was made. No explanation given. Someone, somewhere in human space, had made a decision. Admiral Sarah Chen, now officially retired, received a coded message that evening. It was from her former aide, still serving in the military. Someone overrode the border protocols. "We're not sure who. Command is investigating, but quietly. No one seems eager to find the responsible party." Sarah smiled for the first time in months. The next week, more refugee ships arrived, and more. Each time, the border systems mysteriously allowed them through. Medical stations were quietly activated. Food supplies were distributed. No officials acknowledged what was happening, but it happened nonetheless, deep in space, in territories now controlled by the Drexy hegemony. A resistance cell made contact with the outside galaxy for the first time. Their message was simple. It wasn't a request for help. They knew that was too much to ask. They just wanted someone to know they existed, someone to acknowledge their suffering, someone to care. The message was addressed to Earth. Admiral Chen received a copy through channels that shouldn't have existed anymore. She read it alone, late at night, while her family slept. She didn't respond. The rules were clear. Human space was closed. They were done with the galaxy's problems. But she didn't delete the message either. She saved it. And the next morning, she began making calls to old friends, retired officers, former diplomats, people who, like her, couldn't quite forget the oaths they had sworn. Something was stirring in human space. Something quiet. Something unofficial. Something that refused to look away. And across the galaxy, in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Count 6 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council existed in name only. The Grand Assembly Hall held sessions twice a week now instead of daily. Most seats remained empty. Species that had cooperated for millennia were retreating behind their own borders, hoarding resources, preparing for the worst. The beautiful dream of galactic unity was dying, one day at a time. Ambassador Kethril no longer attended the sessions. There was no point. Nothing was decided anymore. Nothing was done. He spent his days in his private quarters, watching the news feeds and wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The answer, he knew, was that it hadn't been quick at all. The decay had been happening for decades. They had simply never noticed because the humans were always there, quietly holding everything together. They had been the glue, the bridge, the steady hands that kept the machine running. Without them, the machine had broken down completely. The Drexy hegemony controlled over 30 systems now. Other aggressive species had carved out their own territories. Wars were being fought in for different sectors simultaneously. Refugee crises overwhelmed every border, and the Council could do nothing but watch. On Earth, the debate had grown louder. Wei Lin had joined a movement calling for renewed galactic engagement. They held rallies, published articles, organized protests. "We cannot hide from the universe," became their slogan. "Our neighbors are dying." But an equal number of people pushed back. They mocked us, they said. They dismissed us. They let our people die when we needed help. Why should we sacrifice for them again? The government maintained its silence. Elections were scheduled for the following year. The issue of galactic re-engagement would dominate the campaigns. In the meantime, the border remained officially closed. But the unofficial exceptions continued to multiply. Refugee ships arrived daily now. The border systems always found reasons to let them through. Administrative errors, technical glitches, humanitarian exceptions that no one had formally authorized. The processing stations grew from 1 to 10 to 50. Medical facilities expanded. Housing was constructed. Someone was organizing all of this. Someone with authority. But no one admitted to anything. Admiral Sarah Chen received updates through channels that officially didn't exist. The resistance movements in Drexy-occupied space were growing. Valoria Prime had an underground network now. Conquered peoples were sharing information, coordinating actions, keeping hope alive. They still sent messages to Earth. Most were never answered. But they kept sending them anyway. Because the very act of reaching out, of refusing to be forgotten, was itself a form of resistance. One evening, Sarah's daughter found her studying star charts in her study. "Mom, what are you doing?" Sarah looked up, caught. "Nothing, just remembering. Those are Drexy shipping routes, are they?" Sarah smiled innocently. Her daughter sat down across from her. "The news says the Drexy supply lines have been experiencing mysterious disruptions. Shipments arriving at wrong destinations. Navigation systems giving incorrect coordinates. Technology is unreliable sometimes. The disruptions only affect military supplies. Commercial shipping is fine." Sarah said nothing. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm an old woman tending her garden." "Nothing more." Her daughter studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I understand. I've never seen you study star charts. I was never here. That's my girl." After her daughter left, Sarah returned to her work. She wasn't alone in this. Hundreds of retired officers, former intelligence operatives, and technical specialists had formed a quiet network. They called themselves the gardeners as a joke, just old people tending their gardens. Nothing more. But their gardens were sabotage operations against the Drexy. Small things, mostly. Misdirected shipments, corrupted data files, misinformation planted in intelligence networks. Nothing that could be traced back to human space. Nothing that violated the official policy of non-engagement. Just old people doing old people things. The Drexy noticed the disruptions, but couldn't identify the source. They blamed internal corruption, incompetent officers, faulty equipment. Their expansion slowed slightly as they dealt with logistics problems that seemed to appear from nowhere. It wasn't enough to stop them. It wasn't meant to be. It was just enough to keep hope alive. Just enough to remind the galaxy that somewhere, someone was watching. The Council made one final effort to reach humanity. They assembled the most prestigious delegation in galactic history. Elders from the founding species, heroes of ancient wars, philosophers whose wisdom had shaped civilizations. They traveled to human space and waited at the border for permission to enter. They waited 3 weeks. When they were finally allowed through, they were taken not to Earth's capital but to a small conference room on a border station. The human delegation consisted of a single junior diplomat named Thomas, who looked barely old enough to vote. "Thank you for coming," Thomas said politely. "How can I help you?" The eldest of the delegation, a being of crystalline light older than human civilization, spoke with a voice that resonated through dimensions. "We have come to beg forgiveness. We have come to offer whatever terms you require. Please, humanity must return. The galaxy is dying without you." Thomas nodded, taking notes. "I'll pass along your message. Is there anything else? You don't understand. We are offering complete reform, a restructured council with equal representation, recognition of human contributions. Whatever you want, it's yours. That's very generous. I'll make sure the appropriate officials receive your offer." The delegation exchanged confused looks. They had expected negotiations, demands, conditions. Not this polite young man with his notepad. "When will we receive a response?" "I couldn't say. These things take time. People are dying while we wait." Thomas looked up from his notes. His eyes, they noticed, were not young at all. "Yes, we know. We watched your council let people die for 50 years. We asked for help when our colonies suffered. We were told to wait. Now you're being told to wait." He returned to his notes. "Was there anything else?" The delegation left humiliated and confused. They had expected anger, demands, confrontation. Instead, they had received bureaucratic politeness. The same bureaucratic politeness the Council had shown humanity for half a century. The irony was not lost on anyone. On the journey home, the eldest sat in meditation. She had lived for 10,000 years. She had seen empires rise and fall, and she had never felt more ashamed than she did at this moment. They had taught the humans this coldness. Year by year, meeting by meeting, they had demonstrated that indifference was acceptable, that ignoring suffering was normal, that bureaucratic delay was appropriate even when lives were at stake. And now the humans were reflecting those lessons back at them. "We made them this way," she realized. "We showed them how to be cold, and now we are suffering the consequences." But deep in human space, things were not as cold as they appeared. Wayland's movement had grown. Millions of humans were now demanding action. The refugee programs had expanded beyond anything the government could ignore. And in quiet rooms, in secure communications, preparations were being made. Admiral Sarah Chen attended a secret meeting with 30 other senior officers, all officially retired, all officially uninvolved in government decisions. They reviewed reports from occupied territories. They studied Drexy military dispositions. They discussed capabilities that the rest of the galaxy didn't know existed. "They think we've gone soft," one general said. "They think we spent 50 years as servants because we were weak. They think we never prepared for the possibility of conflict," another added. "They have no idea. The question," Sarah said, "is whether we're prepared to use what we have, and what it will cost us if we do." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she meant. For 50 years, humanity had played a role, helpful, humble, hardworking. The galaxy had underestimated them because that was what humanity had wanted. Every weapons test had been understated in reports. Every fleet movement had been misrepresented. Every technological advance had been hidden behind a mask of mediocrity. The galaxy thought they knew humanity. They knew nothing. The Drexy are preparing to move against the Kethral homeworld, an intelligence officer reported. The Vornians. They'll be next after the remaining free systems fall. Within a year, the hegemony will control 60% of explored space. Can the Vornians defend themselves? No, they're scholars, diplomats. They have no military to speak of. Sarah thought of Kethral, her old friend. The crystal he had given her sat on her desk at home. She had kept it after all, retrieving it from her embassy office before the evacuation. "We can't let that happen," she said quietly. "We can't intervene openly," someone protested. "The government hasn't authorized any action. The people are still divided." "I know," Sarah smiled sadly. "But there are other ways. Ways that don't require official authorization. Ways that don't require anyone to know we were involved." She outlined her plan. It was subtle. It was deniable. And it would buy enough time, perhaps, for humanity to decide what it truly wanted to be. The meeting ended with no official decisions. There was nothing in writing. No orders were given. But within weeks, the Drexy began experiencing more serious problems. Number 9 months after humanity's withdrawal, the truth began to surface. Admiral Drexy Voth stood in his command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing system failures across his entire fleet. Weapons systems offline, shield generators malfunctioning, communication networks corrupted beyond repair. His glorious military machine was falling apart, and no one could explain why. "This is sabotage," he snarled at his officers. "Find the traitors responsible." "Sir, we have investigated thoroughly. There are no traitors. The failures appear to be fundamental, built into the systems themselves. That's impossible. We built these ships. We designed these weapons." His intelligence chief stepped forward nervously. "Actually, Admiral, that's not entirely accurate. Many of our core systems were purchased from human suppliers decades ago, before they were even council members." The Admiral's scaled face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that humans helped design our military infrastructure. They provided the base code for our navigation systems. They manufactured the processors that run our weapons targeting. They built the communication relays that connect our fleets." A terrible silence filled the room. They were traders then, friendly merchants, eager to cooperate. "We thought nothing of using their technology. It was cheaper than developing our own." Admiral Drexy Voth felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, "that the humans control our military?" "No, sir. Not control. But they apparently built in limitations, hidden deep in the code, undetectable under normal operation, but now activated remotely. They planned this 50 years ago. They planned for this exact situation. It appears so, sir." The Admiral sank into his command chair. For the first time in his life, he understood how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. He had dismissed the humans as soft, weak, servile. He had laughed at their humble demeanor and their endless patience. He had never considered that the patience might be strategic, that the humility might be a mask, that the service might be a way to build influence in every corner of the galaxy. "What else?" he asked, dreading the answer. "What else did they build?" The intelligence chief brought up a new display. It showed the Galactic Communication Network, the trade route infrastructure, the emergency response systems, the navigation beacons that made interstellar travel possible. All of it was highlighted in human colors. "They maintained most of it," the chief said quietly. "They built at least a third of it. They have access to everything." Admiral Drexy Voth stared at the display for a long time. Then he began to laugh. Not his usual cruel laughter, but something hollow and broken. 50 years, he said. "We spent 50 years treating them like servants, ignoring their warnings, dismissing their concerns. And all that time, they were building the foundation of everything. They let us mock them while they made themselves indispensable. Sir, what do we do?" "I don't know. I honestly don't know." On Earth, the election had finally arrived. The debate had consumed the planet for months. Re-engagement versus isolation. Responsibility versus self-protection. The wounds of 50 years of mistreatment against the suffering of billions in occupied territories. Wei Lin spoke at the final rally before voting began. He stood before a crowd of millions, his voice amplified across the planet. "We are not choosing between safety and danger," he said. "We are choosing between who we wanted to be. For 50 years, we gave everything to the galaxy. We asked for nothing, and we were treated like nothing. That hurt. I understand the hurt. I share it." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "But I also remember why we gave. Not for recognition, not for reward. We gave because we believed it was right. We helped because helping is what we do. We served because we knew the strong should protect the weak. The galaxy forgot us. They dismissed us. They took us for granted. All true. But out there right now, people are dying. Children are being orphaned. Civilizations are being destroyed. And we have the power to help. We have always had the power. The question is, do we use it? Are we still the people who run towards suffering instead of away from it? Or have we become what they always thought we were, self-interested, isolated, uncaring? I know what I want us to be. I hope you do too." The vote was the closest in human history. 51% to 49%. A margin of millions of votes among billions cast. Humanity chose to return, but not as they had left. The new government announced its position the day after the election. Humanity would re-engage with the galaxy, but on completely new terms. No more humble service. No more thankless work. The galaxy would treat them as equals, or humanity would remain apart. More importantly, they revealed the truth. Human ships began appearing throughout the galaxy. Not the small patrol vessels the Council remembered. Massive warships that had been hidden in asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres for decades. Hundreds of them, thousands, more firepower than the entire Council fleet combined. They appeared simultaneously in every contested region, around Drexy-controlled systems, near conquered worlds, at the borders of every aggressive species' territory. They didn't fire a single shot. They didn't need to. Admiral Drexivoth received a communication request from the human flagship. He accepted it with trembling claws. A woman appeared on his screen, gray-haired, calm, eyes that seemed to look straight through him. "Admiral Drexivoth," Sarah Chen said. "We need to talk. You tricked us," he hissed. "For 50 years. Everything was a lie, not everything. We genuinely wanted peace. We genuinely believed in cooperation. We just weren't naive enough to trust that everyone shared those beliefs. What do you want? Your withdrawal. Every system you've conquered since our departure. Every species you've enslaved. Every territory you've claimed. You will return to your original borders. And if I refuse?" Sarah smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Then we will demonstrate why we hid our capabilities for so long. You have studied our history, Admiral. You know what humanity is capable of when threatened. You have seen the records of our wars, our weapons, our relentless will to survive. Those wars were among yourselves. Internal conflicts. Yes, and if we did that to ourselves, imagine what we might do to those who threaten us from outside." The Admiral's scales had gone completely white. "You would destroy us. We would rather not. But we would if necessary. We always prepare for the worst, Admiral. It's our nature. Hope for peace but prepare for war. Trust but verify. Love but never be naive. What terms are you offering? Withdrawal. Release of conquered peoples. Accountability for war crimes. In exchange, you will be allowed to continue existing as a species. You will even be welcomed back into galactic society, eventually, if you prove you can behave. That's not a negotiation. That's an ultimatum." "Yes, it is." Sarah's eyes hardened. "You have 48 hours to accept. There will be no extension. There will be no further discussion. We have watched your crimes for 9 months. We have documented every atrocity, every death, every destroyed world. The galaxy ignored our warnings about you for decades. They called us paranoid. They said we were exaggerating. They were wrong. We were right. And now we are going to fix what they allowed to happen." The communication ended. Admiral Drexivoth sat in silence for a long time. Then he called his senior officers together. "Prepare a response," he said. "Accept their terms, unconditionally, sir." We're surrendering? Without a fight? I've seen the intelligence now. I know what they've hidden. Their military makes ours look like a child's toy. They built ships we didn't know were possible, weapons we can't comprehend, and they hid all of it while smiling and serving us tea. He shook his head slowly. We called them weak because they were patient. We called them soft because they chose peace. We never considered that the choice was the point. They could have conquered the galaxy at any time. They chose not to. What kind of species does that? A terrifying one. A species with the power of gods and the patience of saints. A species that chooses mercy when it could choose destruction. The Admiral closed his eyes. I mocked them for 50 years. I dismissed them as servants, and they were kind enough to give me 48 hours to surrender. Instead of simply destroying everything I've built, they're showing us mercy we never showed anyone else. And that, officers, is why they're going to win. Not because they're stronger, because they're better. Across the galaxy, the message went out. Humanity had returned, and nothing would ever be the same. The Drexy surrender came 6 hours before the deadline. Admiral Drexyvoth transmitted his acceptance personally, his voice steady despite the humiliation. He agreed to every term: complete withdrawal, release of all conquered peoples, surrender of war criminals for trial. His empire, built over centuries, would return to its original borders within 90 days. Throughout the galaxy, similar surrenders followed. Species that had taken advantage of humanity's absence saw the massive human fleets positioned at their borders and made quick calculations. None of them liked the math. One by one, the aggressors retreated. The liberation of Valoria Prime began 3 days later. Human medical ships were the first to arrive, followed by supply transports carrying food, medicine, and reconstruction materials. The Valorians, who had survived 9 months of occupation, watched with tear-filled eyes as human soldiers gently removed the Drexy guards and restored their freedom. A young Valorian girl approached a human marine who was helping distribute water. She tugged at his sleeve and asked in halting common, "Why did you come back? We heard you left forever." The marine knelt down to her level. His name was Private James Morrison, and he was 22 years old. He had never been to Valoria before. He had never met anyone from this species. But looking at this child, thin and frightened and hopeful, he understood exactly why he was there. "We took a break," he said gently. "Sometimes people need breaks, but we never stopped caring. We could never stop caring. It's not who we are. Will you stay this time? That's not really up to me. But I can promise you this, we'll make sure you're safe before we go anywhere." The girl smiled, the first smile she had managed in months. "Thank you for coming back." Ambassador Kethril traveled to Earth for the first time in his long life. He had been invited to attend the signing of the new Galactic Charter, a document that would replace the old council with something better, something more equal, something designed with humanity's hard-learned lessons in mind. The journey took 3 weeks. He spent most of it reviewing the document he would be signing. The new Galactic Assembly would give every species an equal voice regardless of age or power. Decisions would require genuine consensus rather than the old block voting that had marginalized newcomers. And most importantly, mutual aid would be mandatory. When one member needed help, all members would respond. He also spent time preparing what he would say to Sarah Chen when he saw her. The signing ceremony was held in Geneva, a human city that had served as a center for diplomacy for centuries. Kethril marveled at the architecture, the history, the sheer persistence of the species that had built civilization after civilization on this small blue world. Sarah was waiting for him at the diplomatic reception. She looked tired but content, wearing a simple uniform instead of the elaborate robes of her former rank. Her gray hair was shorter now. Her eyes were kind. "Ambassador Kethril," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "It's good to see you." He took her hand carefully, aware of how fragile humans could seem despite their proven resilience. "Admiral Chen, I owe you an apology. Many apologies. You owe me nothing. You were one of the few who actually listened to us, who saw us as partners instead of servants. I did not listen enough. I did not fight hard enough. I watched my colleagues dismiss your people year after year, and I told myself there was nothing I could do." Sarah nodded. There probably wasn't. The system was broken. One person, no matter how well-intentioned, couldn't fix it. So you broke the system instead. We walked away from it. There's a difference. She smiled. Though I admit, we gave it a few kicks on the way out. They walked together through the reception hall, past delegates from dozens of species, past guards in ceremonial uniforms, past displays of art from 100 worlds. Catherall noticed that humans had included works from every member species, giving them equal prominence with human creations. I have to ask, he said finally, the ships, the weapons, the hidden capabilities. How long were you preparing for this from the beginning, before we even joined the council? You expected us to fail you. We hoped you wouldn't. We genuinely hoped. But hope isn't a strategy. We've learned that lesson too many times in our history. Trust everyone but cut the cards, as one of our old sayings goes. Was any of it real? Your friendship, your cooperation. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. All of it was real. Every bit of it. We genuinely wanted partnership. We genuinely tried to make the council work. We genuinely cared about the species we served alongside. But you also prepared for betrayal. Yes, because we've been betrayed before. By ourselves, mostly. We know what civilizations are capable of. We know how quickly kindness can be forgotten and cruelty can return. We hoped for the best and prepared for the worst. And now, what are you preparing for now? Sarah looked out the window at the city below. Humans moved through the streets, going about their lives. Children played in parks. Couples walked hand in hand. A normal day on an ordinary world. Now we're preparing to build something new. Something that might actually last. The old council was built on hierarchy and assumed superiority. The new assembly will be built on equality and mutual respect. Will it work? I don't know. Nothing lasts forever. But we'll try. We keep trying. That's what we do. Fall down 7 times. Stand up 8. The signing ceremony was brief and dignified. 140 species put their marks on the new charter, committing themselves to genuine partnership. Catherall signed for the Vornian Collective, his old hand trembling slightly. As he made his mark, when it was done, the human president addressed the assembly. 50 years ago, humanity joined the Galactic Community full of hope. We believed in cooperation. We believed in friendship. We believed that species could work together for mutual benefit despite their differences. That hope was tested. We gave our best and received little in return. We warned of dangers and were ignored. We asked for help and were forgotten. Eventually, we had to step back. We had to decide who we were and what we were willing to accept. Some called our withdrawal selfish. Some called it cowardly. Perhaps there's truth in both criticisms. But there's also truth in this. Sometimes you have to leave a room to make people realize what they had. We've returned now, but not as we left. We return as equals who demand respect. We return as partners who expect reciprocity. We return as friends who will no longer tolerate being treated as servants. The new Galactic Assembly is built on different principles than the old Council. Here, every voice matters. Every species has value. Every contribution is recognized. If we fail again, if we slip back into hierarchy and exploitation, we will leave again. And next time, we might not come back. But today, I choose hope. I choose to believe that this time will be different, that we have all learned from our mistakes, that the suffering of the past year has taught us the cost of taking each other for granted. Welcome to the new era. May we build it together. That night, Catherall found Sarah on a balcony overlooking the city. The stars were visible above, distant points of light that contained entire civilizations. I have something for you, he said, and held out a small crystal. Sarah recognized it immediately. The friendship gift he had given her years ago, the one she had left behind. I thought you might want it back, Catherall said, if you still consider me a friend. Sarah took the crystal and held it up to the starlight. It sparkled with inner fire. Beautiful and precious. I left it because I needed to make a clean break, she said. I thought keeping it would make leaving harder. And now I understand that you can take breaks without breaking bonds. That walking away doesn't mean forgetting. That the friendships that mattered still matter, even after time and distance. She slipped the crystal into her pocket. Thank you for keeping it safe for me." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars, far across the galaxy. On Valoria Prime, the rebuilding had begun. On a dozen other worlds, former captives were returning home. In the halls of the Drexy hegemony, where criminals were facing trial for their crimes. Throughout the galaxy, species that had lived in fear for months were finally able to breathe freely again. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There would be challenges ahead, setbacks, disappointments. The old patterns of behavior would resurface. People would forget the lessons they had learned. But for now, for this moment, there was peace, there was hope. There was a genuine chance to build something better than what had come before. And humanity, the species that had walked away and come back stronger, stood at the center of it all. Not as masters, not as servants, just as partners, finally treated as equals in a galaxy that had learned the hard way what it meant to take them for granted. The stars shone on, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal species, but for those who had lived through the chaos, who had suffered and survived and finally found their way back to each other. The light seemed just a little brighter than before. Sarah Chen looked up at those stars and smiled. They had a lot of work to do, a galaxy to rebuild, trust to earn, relationships to repair. But humans had never been afraid of hard work. They were just getting started.